Get this. The UK spent like over £7.5 billion on universal credit for foreign nationals just last year, 2023.
Why?
That's a huge number. And you know it sparked this massive debate about immigration, benefits, the whole thing, and what it all means for the UK's future. So you sent us this GB News video, and it goes right into this fiery topic. We're going to unpack it all with you.
This video, it really taps into those anxieties around the economy, like, are we going to have enough money? And then, national identity. All these feelings, I think, have just become so much more intense since Brexit.
It definitely does, yeah. Right away, they hit us with these big numbers from the Department for Work and Pensions. Over 1 million non-British people getting universal credit.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
It is. And it's important for everyone to remember that once someone has indefinite leave to remain in the UK, they legally have the right to the same benefits as British citizens. It's all part of UK immigration policy, and it reflects the rights of people who have settled there.
Okay, that makes sense. But then they throw out this other stat. People from 40 nationalities are claiming more benefits than British citizens. And they specifically mention people from Congo, Iraq, and Afghanistan claiming at 4 times the rate of Brits. That's kind of startling.
It is startling, yeah. And it makes you think, what's going on here? What factors might be contributing to these big differences? Could it be like employment opportunities are different, or maybe there are language barriers, or maybe it's hard to access support networks? It's something to think about.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
So then the video, it jumps into how the Conservatives are reacting to all of this. They quote this MP, Chris Philp, and he calls this whole situation unacceptable and astonishing.
Oh, wow.
And his solution is pretty drastic.
Yeah.
He wants to ban low-paid and jobless asylum seekers from getting that indefinite leave to remain, and he wants to increase the salary threshold for work visas. Get this, £38,700.
Wow. Okay, so, their whole approach is putting economic contributions first, right?
Hmm.
It's like you have to contribute to the economy if you want to immigrate. Seems like they really want to reduce what they see as, a financial strain on the system. But then you wonder, is that going to lead to discrimination? What about industries that really need those lower wage workers? What's going to happen to them?
That's a good point. And speaking of different approaches, the video then goes on to talk about how some Labour MPs are concerned about potential cuts to disability benefits. And those cuts could even hurt British citizens. The mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, he even argues that the focus should be on helping people get jobs, not cutting those benefits.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? You have the conservatives who are, really focused on being responsible with money and controlling immigration. But then Labor is saying, no, we have to have those social safety nets. We have to be inclusive. It really shows this back and forth about what the government should do. Should they focus on a competitive economy or take care of people?
Totally. And just when you think it can't get more complicated, they bring up the asylum system. It's like this whole other thing. The cost is soaring beyond belief, they say. And get this, the number of failed asylum seekers waiting for appeal decisions has gone up like almost 500% in just 2 years. It's crazy.
Yeah.
They say by the end of 2024, it's going to be 419,197 people.
That's a lot of people just waiting. And think about it. Housing all those asylum seekers in hotels while they wait, that costs money. It's estimated to be like £6–7 million every day. So the government, what they want to do is set a deadline for appeals. They're talking about 24 weeks. They're hoping that'll cut processing time in half.
And that's really different from Labour's idea, right? They're proposing this £2 million package to increase legal aid fees, so lawyers who represent asylum seekers can get paid more. It's like 2 totally different ways to solve the same problem.
Right. So it makes you wonder, are these solutions even getting at the root of the problem? What's going to happen if we limit how long people have to appeal? Or what if we make sure everyone have a lawyer? What are the consequences? These are really tough questions.
No kidding. And just when you think it can't get any crazier, they bring in Ann Widdecombe. She was the Shadow Home Secretary, and she's a spokesperson for the Reform Party. And she's got this stance that's, well, let's just say it's bold.
Oh, yeah.
She was on Good Morning Britain, and she's advocating for, get this, a no-claim policy. Basically, asylum seekers who come from countries considered safe, they wouldn't even be allowed to apply for asylum.
Whoa.
Yeah, she's saying, look, if they've traveled through other safe countries to get to the UK, they're not really in danger. They're just, trying to play the system. Her solution, send them back, either to their home country or to that safe country they came from.
Wow, that's a pretty controversial idea. Yeah, it brings up a lot of questions, like, is it even ethical? Is it legal? What about international law? And then, practically speaking, how would they even do that? There's just So much to unpack there.
Totally. They even showed a clip of her on Good Morning Britain, and she's criticizing France for not taking back asylum seekers, and she's suggesting the UK needs to be, like, way tougher. She even mentioned Donald Trump and how he handled things.
Oh, wow. Okay, so now it's getting even more complicated because if the UK takes that kind of like confrontational approach, it could really mess things up with other European countries,
Yeah.
like diplomatically and economically. That's a big risk.
Yeah, no doubt. So we've got these crazy high benefit costs, a completely jammed up asylum system, and everyone's got a different solution. It's kind of hard to keep up with, right? Like,
Yeah.
what does this all mean for the average person in the UK? How are they supposed to make sense of all of this?
Right. It's the big question, isn't it? I think this deep dive into the UK's immigration and benefits debate really shows how much the country is struggling with. Like, who are we? And what do we want our future to look like? On the one hand, there's this need for economic stability and controlled borders. But on the other hand, there's this commitment to social welfare and inclusivity.
Yeah, and it feels like those two things are always like bumping up against each other, and how the UK figures out how to balance those things, that's going to have a huge impact on everyone, especially the most vulnerable people, both in the UK and those seeking refuge from other places.
You're absolutely right. And we can't forget that this isn't just happening in the UK. All around the world, countries are dealing with the same kinds of challenges as migration changes and, the global economy keeps evolving. What's happening in the UK and how they talk about it, it could really impact other countries too. It's like we're watching a crucial case study in real time.
A case study with no easy answers and possibly some really big consequences.
Exactly. And that's why this deep dive is so important. If we understand how complex this issue is, if we look at all the different opinions and think about what might happen with different solutions, then we can be part of this conversation in a more informed and, thoughtful way.
Okay, so let's do a little recap of what we've learned so far. We've seen the crazy cost of universal credit for foreign nationals. We've talked about the conservatives and labor and their very different solutions. And then there's this whole explosive growth of the asylum system.
Right. And we also took a look at Ann Widdecombe and her no-claim policy, brings up those ethical and legal questions. And it could really affect how the UK gets along with other countries.
Yeah, and through it all, there's this tension between like doing what makes sense for the economy and doing what's right for people. How does a country take care of its own citizens while also being there for people seeking refuge? How do you manage all these people coming in, but also make sure everyone has a fair chance?
Those are the questions at the heart of this whole debate. And as we've seen, there are no easy answers. But by doing this deep dive, you've got more knowledge and context to, navigate all of this.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, we need to look at one more piece of this, and that's the economic side of immigration. How does immigration affect wages and jobs for British citizens?
Yeah, that's a good one. People don't talk about that enough, but it's really important if you want to understand the whole picture.
Right, because there's this big fear that if too many immigrants come in, wages are going to go down and it's going to be harder for Brits to find work. It's something you hear all the time.
It's a very common concern. And, politicians use that fear a lot. But when you look at how the economy actually works, it's a lot more complicated than that. Some studies do show that immigration can have a small negative impact on wages for low-skilled workers,
Right.
but that's usually just in the short term.
That makes sense. But what about, over time? Like, what's the impact on the UK economy as a whole?
That's where things get interesting. You see, a lot of economists actually say that, in the long run, immigration helps the economy grow. Immigrants bring in new skills and ideas. They start businesses, they create jobs, and they pay taxes.
So it's not just about what immigration costs the UK, but what immigrants contribute to the economy.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And if we don't see that, we might end up making bad policies that actually hurt the economy in the long run. Like, think about the conservatives' idea to increase the salary threshold for work visas.
The one we talked about earlier.
That's the one. It seems like a way to make sure only highly skilled immigrants come to the UK, right? But it might not work out that way.
How so?
Well, think about it. If they make it harder for people to get work visas, there might not be enough workers in important industries. Like, what about healthcare? What about hospitality? What about agriculture? Those industries need foreign workers.
And then if there aren't enough workers, prices go up, and the economy grows slower, which hurts everyone.
Exactly. There are so many things connected to this. That's why we need to understand the economics if we want to have a real discussion about this.
It's like, thinking about what will happen tomorrow versus thinking about what will happen 10 years from now.
Yes. And this whole immigration debate, it's always framed as, like, us against them. People who were born here against immigrants.
Which just creates a lot of fear and negativity.
Exactly. But we have to remember that immigration has always happened. People have always moved around. Societies have always been shaped by migration. The UK itself, it's a product of all these waves of migration. It's part of what makes it what it is.
So maybe it's not about keeping people out, but more about like managing how people move in a way that benefits everyone.
Yes, you got it. And to do that, you have to think about the economy, the social dynamics, and what's humane. You have to come up with policies that help immigrants integrate, that make them feel like they belong, and that give everyone the chance to contribute and do well.
That sounds like a pretty big task.
It is, but it's worth it. In the end, a country is stronger when it's diverse, when it's open to new ideas and new perspectives, and when it welcomes people from all over.
That's a message that gets lost a lot in all this debate about immigration.
It does. But by doing these deep dives, by looking at the facts, thinking about the arguments, and understanding how complex it all is, we can go beyond just the headlines and have a better conversation about immigration. One that recognizes the challenges and the opportunities that come with, living in a world where everyone's connected.
Well said. This has been really eye-opening. I feel like I'm looking at all this in a whole new way.
Me too. It's amazing what you can learn when you take the time to really understand something complicated.
Absolutely. And we're not done yet. There's still a lot more to unpack. So join us for part 2 of this deep dive, where we'll keep exploring the UK's immigration and benefits debate. Okay, so we covered a lot already, benefit costs, asylum seekers, and we even touched on the whole economic side of immigration. But this GB News video, they also show us some like specific cases, and honestly, some of them are really shocking.
Yeah, that's true. They highlight these examples that, you really see the people behind all these policies and all this debate.
Like there's this one story about a migrant family, and they've been stuck living in a hotel for over a year.
Oh, wow.
And it's costing taxpayers thousands of pounds. It's kind of heartbreaking, especially
Well,
when you see the kids caught in the middle of it all.
yeah, it's a powerful image. And it makes you think about the human costs of all this. Imagine you leave your home, you go to a new country, and then you're just stuck in a hotel room for months and months. The uncertainty, the stress, it must be so hard.
It's hard to even imagine. And the video, it doesn't shy away from the cost to taxpayers either. They show all these figures, like millions and millions of pounds being spent to house these asylum seekers in hotels. And it makes you wonder, is there a better way, like a more efficient way, a more humane way to do this?
That's a good point. It seems like everyone agrees that this system, it's just not working. The question is, how do we fix it?
Right. And it's not just about the money. This video also has interviews with people who live in these communities, and they're feeling the pressure of all this immigration. Some talk about how the schools and hospitals are overcrowded, and some are worried about how their towns are changing culturally.
Yeah, those are real concerns. People should be able to talk about those things. It reminds us that immigration, it affects communities in so many ways, and we need to be able to talk about it honestly.
Absolutely. But the video also shows people who are like really compassionate. They want people to understand. They tell stories about immigrants who have started businesses, contributed to the economy, become like valuable members of their communities. It's a good reminder that this isn't so simple. There are so many different sides to this.
It's all about balance, isn't it? Seeing the challenges, but also seeing the good things that come with immigration.
Totally. Okay, so then the video kind of shifts gears and they start talking about politics and immigration. They show all these clips of politicians debating, and sometimes it gets pretty heated. You've got people on the right, they want tighter borders and less benefits, and then the left wants to be more compassionate, make it easier to become a citizen.
Yeah, it's that classic political divide.
Yeah.
It shows how divided the UK is on this whole issue.
And it's not just a UK thing, right? It feels like every country is having the same arguments.
You're right. It's a global thing. Immigration is this hot button issue everywhere, and politicians use it to scare people and divide them.
It's frustrating because it feels like we can't even have a real conversation about this. Like, how do we manage migration so everyone benefits?
I agree. We need to stop just talking and start looking at solutions that actually work.
So let's talk solutions. This GB News video, they throw out a few ideas. Some are pretty controversial, but they talk about making borders more secure, making the asylum process faster, and creating more ways for skilled immigrants to come in.
Yeah, those are all good things to think about, but, There's no easy fix. Any solution that actually works, it's going to have to be complicated, and it's going to have to deal with the economic side and the humanitarian side of immigration.
You're exactly right. It's like we have to stop thinking about just controlling immigration and start thinking about, like, how do we manage it in a way that makes everyone better off?
And that means we have to change the way we think individually and as a society.
Okay, so let's get a little philosophical here. What does this mean for the future of the UK? This video, it's kind of pessimistic. Some experts, they even say the whole immigration system is about to fall apart.
Well, it's definitely a make or break moment. What the UK decides to do now, it's going to have a huge impact down the road. If they shut themselves off from the rest of the world, they could become isolated and their economy could suffer. But if they see immigration as a good thing, they could stay strong and prosperous.
Those are some pretty big stakes.
They are. And it's not just about the UK. The whole world is becoming more interconnected and people are going to keep moving around. How the UK handles this, it could be an example for other countries who are going through the same thing.
That's a lot of pressure. So what do we do now? What are the next steps?
Well, first, we have to keep talking about it. We have to keep learning about how complicated immigration is. We have to talk to people who have different opinions, and we have to push for policies that work and that are humane.
I like that. Educate ourselves, talk to each other, and advocate for change. That sounds like a good plan.
It's a start, for sure.
Okay, so this GB News video, it's given us a lot to think about. We've looked at how immigration affects the economy and society, the problems with the asylum system, all the political debates, and some of the solutions people are talking about. It's a lot.
It is. But it's been a good deep dive, and I hope you have a better understanding of this whole thing.
I know, I do. And I'm curious, what about you? What did you get out of this deep dive? What questions do you still have? Let us know in the comments. Wow, we've really gone deep on this one, huh? From the numbers to the actual stories, it feels like we've gone through everything in this GB News video on UK immigration.
We really have, yeah. And it's interesting because even though this video is all about the UK, it kind of touches on some really basic truths about immigration. You know what I mean? It's something every country has to deal with. And there's no one solution that fits everybody.
Yeah, totally. It makes you think, like, what can we learn from other countries? What are they doing that's working? What mistakes have they made that, maybe the UK can avoid?
Exactly. Like, take Canada, for example. They've got this points-based system. You get points for your skills, your education, all that. And a lot of people say it's fair, and it works pretty well. But it has its problems, too. Some people say it's too focused on the economy, and it doesn't do enough to help people who really need it. The humanitarian side of things.
Interesting. So it sounds like no matter what you do, there are going to be some downsides.
Yeah, there are always trade-offs. That's why it's so important to have these conversations, where we really think things through. We have to look at the good and bad of each approach, think about what will happen in the long run, and be ready to change things up if we need to.
It's a real puzzle, isn't it? Like trying to fit all these pieces together to create a system that works for everybody.
That's a great way to put it. And it's a puzzle that keeps changing. The world is always changing, and new problems come up all the time.
Okay, so if there's no easy answer, like no magic solution, what can we as individuals do? I mean, sometimes it feels like, what difference does it even make,
I know what you mean. It can feel overwhelming. But honestly, I do believe that the things we do as individuals can make a difference.
Yeah.
Especially if we join with other people who care about the same things.
Okay, so like what? Give me some examples.
Well, for starters, we have to stay informed.
Yeah.
Read about the issue, try to get different perspectives, and call out fake news when we see it.
So fight the misinformation.
Exactly. And we can support organizations that are helping immigrants integrate, that are fighting for better policies, that are promoting tolerance and understanding between communities.
Yeah. And don't underestimate just like talking to people, getting to know people from different backgrounds, listening to their stories, sharing our own. That can help break down stereotypes and build empathy.
That's so true. We need to build those connections, especially now when things are so polarized.
It all comes back to that, doesn't it? Remembering that we're all human, appreciating our differences, and working together to make the world a more welcoming place for everyone.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. We've covered a lot, and I hope you found it as interesting and thought-provoking as I have.
I've really enjoyed this conversation.
And a huge thank you to you, our listener, for sharing this GB News video with us and for joining us on this journey. Every deep dive is a chance to learn more about the world and become more involved. So until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.